Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Create Your Best Chapter podcast. My name is Vera Ilnitsky, and I help women solopreneurs expand their business, make more money, and get really focused on what it is that they need to do in order to get there. And on this podcast, I have amazing guests who are really creating a positive impact in the world, who are doing really amazing things. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that I typically have women as my guest. And today I actually have Matt Riddel. So he is not a woman, he's a man, but we love men. We get inspiration and motivation from everyone in our life. And I'm just really excited to have Matt on the show today. Now, Matt has spent more than 20 years in different client-facing roles. He's climbed the ladder, and for all intents and purposes has had a really successful career, particularly in enterprise software sales, where he has spent the last 14 years. And we're going to get into this story a little bit, but on the inside, there was still something that was out of alignment for Matt, something missing. And as his success grew, so did the stress, the anxiety, and the eventual depression. And all the money or accomplishments didn't really matter, and Matt ended up burning out. In 2024, Matt started his practice as an executive mindset coach. He works with individuals and teams to dismantle the barriers of self-doubt and external validation as we ignite our inner light to inspire others. And I'm really excited to have Matt on the show. Matt, welcome to the Create Your Best Chapter podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate the invite. It's been wonderful to reconnect with you, and this is exciting. Am I the first male guest that you've had on?
Well, in this iteration of the podcast, this is season 4 of my podcast. So I started back in 2021 or 2022, I think, and then I was interviewing a whole bunch of different people who were doing, again, just really amazing things in the world, really inspiring. And then I shifted my focus to work primarily with women, and so naturally my guests have been women, but I love working with men. I love working with all types of people, and your story in particular really struck me. And it's interesting to give a little bit of background. I mean, I knew you when you were working as a financial planner, financial advisor. I mean, I like to call that like many lifetimes ago. I was in a different state. I was, in a different role in my life, doing something completely different, and so were you. And we reconnected recently through the power of social media, and I started seeing your posts and what you were doing, and I was like, I need to reconnect with Matt because he's doing some really amazing things. And we met, and you told me your story, and I think that it needs to be shared because there's so many of us that are experiencing or have experienced feeling like you did, burnt out and stressed and anxious. And so I'm curious if you can go into that story a little bit of how you recreated this new chapter of your life.
Yeah. Wow. So it's, I'm going to try and summarize. I have a tendency to sometimes get on a tangent. So keep me between the bumpers on this, but to your point and what you just mentioned, I was in finance for a number of years, personal finance, but I've been in customer or client facing roles directly for over 20 years now. Even before you knew me, I was a general manager, minority owner of a small surf shop in Calgary, of all places, a landlocked surf shop that I helped to build a sales team and a marketing engine and a merchandising engine behind. Interestingly enough, I said to my daughter not that long ago that the happiest I ever was vocationally was there, where I was making the least amount of money, but had complete creative control. And it was just a fun place to be. How I morphed into finance and eventually into sales was that I got caught in this construct of, well, I don't want to be knocking on the door of 30 years old and just be an employee of a surf shop. That's not grown up. That's not what I'm supposed to do. So when my plan to actually buy out that business just couldn't come together, just not for any reason other than the universe hitting me over the head saying, this isn't the path. A mentor and friend of mine pulled me over to, at the time, Investors Group, before it was IG Wealth Management now. But that's where you and I met. And I was, as you said, you were in a very different phase in your life, as was I. And I started to conform to this kind of a corporate methodology, very suit and tie, very, this is the way, and now this is what grown-ups do. And it's about money and accolades and having the things and the stuff and the lifestyle and all great stuff. As my career flourished, I was spending more time around kitchen tables that were not my own because that's the type of business you're in. You're dealing with people and meeting them quite literally where they are and figuratively to help them with their financial position, whether it's retirement or estate planning or continuance or anything like that. But I had also met my wife at the time, who had a daughter from her first marriage, whose father wasn't in the picture. And now I had a family. It was just Dad Matt, right? And I wanted to spend my evenings and weekends around my kitchen table and not my clients. So I transitioned out of that, and I continued to fall into, without getting deep into the weeds, I was presented with an opportunity at IBM that I had no business getting. But again, the universe kind of showing up and saying, here is a path if you want it. And I knew that I wanted it because I started to really beat the drum to get myself into it. I manifested that. I managed to make it happen. And when I say I had no business, I came from a surf shop GM who had a background in accounting, granted, but I came from a general manager at a small retail surf shop selling skate shoes and skateboards and surfboards and equipment and board shorts, all that kind of stuff, to financial management and becoming a certified financial planner. I had no business selling enterprise class software to the CFO of a major energy company in Calgary. In fact, the people in Markham at IBM in HR said to my hiring manager, we wouldn't put this kid, I was 30, we wouldn't put this kid on a headset in Markham to make cold calls for the next 2 years. He's not qualified. People fought for me and still got me this role. And I did very well. And that began this escalation of my IT sales career, where I sought elevation from my peers and from mentorship, and I continued to climb this ladder. As I climbed that ladder, more money, more accolades, more appreciation for me. But what also came was this internal struggle of, well, I made X number of dollars last year. How do I make more? I closed this deal, but I'm also getting asked by my manager, that's great, but that was last quarter. What have you done for me lately? So it became this endless rat race that the more you did, the more you made, and the more that I experienced in success, the less I was capable of actually handling the stress and the anxiety and the self-doubt and all the negative vibrations and feelings that came from questioning that and from that self-doubt. So without nurturing and accepting those parts of myself, or connecting with myself, or having some sort of practice, I should say practices, to reflect and to integrate new ways to really be a better Matt as I continued to grow, I ended up burning out. I was so focused on the external, as a lot of us can be, that I was never putting the attention on the internal. I was people pleasing and focused on everything else showing up for other people that I thought I had to take care of at home or at work, and never enough for myself. And that's really the leading contributor to burnout, is believing that going faster is going to solve your problems. Doing more is going to solve your problems. When in reality, that just creates that urgency and creates that anxiety. And if we don't do something about it, or we don't figure out our ways or get coached in ways to manage them, then we can tailspin. And that's what happened to me. And so coming back from that, it was when I finally had to take an initial stress leave. I should have left the industry and my role then, but I stuck it out for another year and a half. And I jumped from one company to another as a soft landing while I figured out my exit strategy. But as you and I have talked before, like, the universe shows up in very interesting ways. And for me, it showed up in, Matt, what you're planning for your exit strategy, you're already out. You're already done. Get out and start acting on yourself now, because that's the only thing that's only going to move you forward and propel you through this. The only way out is through. And it's been such a wonderful year, because it's interesting right now. It's almost, it's just a little over a year since I left my last pure sales role to start to build something of my own. that I could contribute back to, some greater good. So this 12 months has been so life-changing and eye-opening. And it continues to be, and it continues to propel me forward in a way that I'm still learning so much about myself and about other people. But now I know that I can, as I've been collecting all this data, now I can start to action it and help people. And I've built a business around it, as have you. So I think it's probably a lot of resonance in that, in what I've just said. I know I've said a lot. That's really what brought me to today. This knowing that change is constant, and that if I can continue to focus on what's within my control, then all of the bad shit can be transmuted and I can continue to propel myself forward. And if I'm so lost on what's not within my control and trying to force it, like sucking a golf ball through a garden hose, I'll suffocate.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, Matt. And that's an incredible story. And one thing I'm hearing too is that, and this happened to me as well, and I think it happens to a lot of people, is that we look to the external of what we should, quote unquote, be doing. And I use quotation marks around the word should, because I don't believe in that word and I try not to use it. But we fall into this pattern of, well, this is how I was programmed and conditioned. This is what I was told to do. And so I better do this thing. Like I better go to school and then get married and have kids and then go get the career and then get the promotion and get the next promotion. And none of those things are bad in and of themselves. I think they're great. It's awesome to do these things. It's awesome to have families, and it's awesome to have a career, and it's awesome to make money. But we oftentimes don't do it because we really want to. It's because we feel this is what we should be doing. And what I'm curious about is, do you think that, like, I know I talked to a lot of women, and I know that as women, we have this programming, this conditioning of here's what we should be doing. Here's how we need to be presenting ourselves. Here's the next step for you. Do you think that, well, I know that men have the same thing, but do you think that it's a different should, or like a different pressure on men? Like from your experience, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. That's a really great nut to crack, because I think men should all over themselves just as much as women. But you're right, it's probably in different ways. There's this false matrix construct out there that you've described of, this is the way we're supposed to live our lives, that you go through high school and you get a post-secondary education, and maybe you have a serious relationship or two, and then you finally settle down, you get married, and you have 2.4 children, and you have 2 cars, and you have the house, and you do, 1 week here every year, and I think as men, we have the same fear, we have the same self-doubt, we have the same pressure on us to live up to these societal expectations, and we don't do a good enough job at questioning, is this actually what I want? Whether that's as men or as women. I don't think it's exclusive to gender. I think you're right. I think there would be differences, there would be nuances in how men do it, and because we are men and we are led to believe that we have to be masculine, I think that fear shows up differently. I think the pressure shows up differently. I think with men, I was about to say maybe with men it's more anger. But I don't know. I mean, I know my ex-wife, or I know a lot of women that I love and appreciate and care about, that I've worked with, that they'll be just as angry with themselves. And I remember actually my ex, who I adore, we had a very amicable split, and we're still very close. And I remember her saying to me, when I was in a pretty deep pit of despair and frustration, and for me, it was showing up as self-hate, and I was having a really bad day, and I was tail spinning. And instead of doing what my wife at the time normally did, in giving me some space to expand through that and support the way that she could, she had gone through enough at that time that she reacted in a way that on paper would not be beneficial, but it ended up helping very much because it gave me a glimpse into what she had been experiencing. And it helped me understand that self-doubt and loathing and hate and questioning yourself and going through the rigor of, am I good enough? Even if it's conscious or not, but the questioning of, am I good enough? Is not exclusive to me or to men. And she said, she's like, you don't have, what was it? You don't have a stake in the ground on hating yourself. Something to that effect. And it made me go, oh, okay. So it's not just me. This is a human condition that we question ourselves, and we have this pressure on ourselves to perform and to live up to some external image. Whether we even adhere, most often we don't even question if that's something that we want or would adhere to. So for men, I believe that the metrics may be different, but I don't think it's any different in that we question ourselves and we believe that we're being watched and all eyes are on us, and we need to perform, we need to provide. If we're not doing that, we're seen as less than. For men, if we don't make as much money as the next person, or if we're not of a C-suite status in the corporate world, we're seen as less than. It's also partly why I think the corporate regime and that construct, or how capitalism works, is much more of a man's world, because I think when the hierarchy started to crumble in the industrial, I might be getting too into the ether here, but when the Industrial Revolution came, all of a sudden landowners and royalty didn't really matter anymore. So how do we climb this ladder? Well, the common man can now become wealthy and affluent. Well, what about just the common person? What about the question of, is that what we need right now? So there's always, I think, through our society and through evolution, we've been chasing wanting to be seen and wanting to be heard. And there's a macro effect of how people chase that. But I don't think we're doing a good enough job at the micro. And that's the inner work that you and I have talked about. Do that inner work is, how do I want to be seen? How do I want to be heard? Why is it important to me? And now we're not talking about whether it's the pressures on men, women, or anybody, however anybody identifies. It's just, you just want to be a human first, and you want to be seen and heard in the way that you can. And when you are accepted in that way, most importantly and first and foremost by yourself, then you show up better. You show up better for yourself, and you show up better for anybody else that's out there. So I think, God, a long-winded sales guy answer to a short question, but I think we all want to be seen. And I think we all put a lot of external pressure on ourselves because of the way we're taught we should be seen. And that's a system that we can very easily break, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take a change in the practices.
Well, and I appreciate that answer. And I do think that it is a human condition, right? We do have a human condition to be seen and connected and belong. And we do have this human condition that we tend to go towards the negative and get ourselves into this victim mindset, which is kind of what you were describing, this, the self-hate and the self-loathing. It's really, how do you, and we think we're the only ones going through that, when in reality, we're all struggling with something. We're all carrying something. And deep down, I think all of us want to discover what that is and become better versions of ourselves every day. Now, whether or not we do or not, I think is a different story, because there's a lot of fear and anxiety and conditioning wrapped up around that. It takes a lot of courage to look at yourself very deeply and honestly. And, that's my next question to you is, how did you start to really discover what it is that you want? Like, not what the external world was telling you that you want, but that you, like, how did you tap into what the universe or God was telling you deep down in your soul?
Yeah. And I appreciate this question so much, because until recently, I didn't realize I had been fighting this conversation with God that I have been, I think, wanting to have for so long. And it wasn't until the last couple of years that I started to understand a little bit more about what my faith and what my belief is. And this isn't, I'm not talking religion. This is more spirituality and just where my place is in it. Through everything that I experienced in the last number of years, and as I continue to climb and succeed, I don't know that there is a specific moment or a some particulate in time that I could say that's when the universe hit me over the head, that it resonated the most. It was through depression, and my wife was going through a lot of depression. Height of COVID, even the start of COVID, right? So lockdown, we had lost family members on both sides. Nobody to COVID directly, but it happened, and there was nothing we could do about it. You can't go and see people. You can't put people in the ground. There was a lot of that. And when my wife started to really spiral into a deep depression, I guess I didn't realize until recently that when I started to just show up for her and not worry about everything else. So even my work, my job at the time, not that I was neglecting it, I just wasn't worrying or thinking about it. And because I wasn't, everything was just showing up the way it needed to. Now I was watching her and so much focus on her going through what she was going through that all I could do was prop her up. And so when she started to come back, for whatever reason, the cycle continued of depression, but it trickled over into me. So the scales tipped. And now after years of propping her up, well, now she was trying to prop me up. And this vast codependence solidified in our household. And so it was when we recognized that neither of us feel 100% any point of the time. And a big part of that is because if the other person doesn't feel good, it's hard for us to feel, for me to feel good if she's not feeling good. We started to seek some new modalities. We looked into transcendental meditation. I was much more willing to try new things where I was still a little bit of a redneck. I've always been very open. I've been much more liberal than conservative, not just politically, but more socially, let's say. That I was still very much like, I don't want to lean into the woo. I don't want to go into meditation. Religion doesn't have a place for me. Yoga, I'd rather go to the gym. All these things that were externally focused. What would people think of me if they saw me doing yoga? What would people think of me if I said, yeah, I meditate twice a day for 20 minutes? And when I was able to, so I guess it's not a specific moment, but when I started to say, I don't feel the way I want to feel. I don't feel like I'm really connected with who Matt is. Further to that, the more I drift away from that, the feeling of who I really am or want to be, which is happiness and joy, the bigger the ick factor. So I got to a point where I was like, I'm going to start trying these things. To support my wife, I started to do yoga with her. And I remember, I still do it every day. Almost every day, I still do it on YouTube. And I still do it with the same, a YouTube creator, because that's what I've got used to, but it's because it works and it's become home to me. I don't care what anybody thinks about it. It doesn't matter, because I know that it regulates my breath and my nervous system in the morning, especially on those days that I was lying in bed for the first 20 minutes thinking, how can I put it together today? And then that takes me right into another modality of meditation. And that's that moment in stillness, that quiet time that I can slow down my mind, even first thing in the morning, to just be quiet and reflect and listen. There's somebody, I think it was Steve Harvey of all people, that said, prayer is talking and meditation is listening. And so taking that moment of stillness in the morning and listening. And so as I started to adhere to more of these modalities, I'm like, well, I start to feel better. And there's this 8-year-old me inside that is going, you can have the things that you want, and you can live the lifestyle you want. And you can do that by helping other people feel better about themselves. And so it was, the more I leaned into the inner work and focusing on how does Matt feel and how can I make Matt feel better today about himself, And starting with self-love, because that's where you need to start.
Mhm.
You need to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I love you, and mean it. That was when my journey started, and it started, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I still do it every day, have these conversations. And even this week, every once in a while it creeps in. It's like, God, I could backslide so easily and just fall into another IT software role for, $250,000 a year and just do it.
Mhm.
And not worry about, when the money's showing up, or do I have clients this week, or, how do I manage this? And the feeling of that is like, no, that's not what you're here for. That's not what you're here to do. You're here to transmute all these feelings that you've had because you've been through enough BS in your life that you can alchemize this. And that's what people need right now more than ever.
Mhm.
And the audience to give it to. And
Mhm.
so I've gone through, I'll add one thing onto that I've gone through such a transformation in the last year to finally get to where I am now, that I knew I wanted to coach. I knew I wanted to work with individuals about feeling better about themselves. And I had been suppressing this salesperson that had been working for 20 odd years, to finally realize it's like, no, the people that I can help the most are the people that I wasn't elevated by in my career, because they didn't know where to start. So I've developed my practice to be this executive sales coach to sales individuals and teams, to help them completely change themselves and their model in such a subtle way that they will be more successful and happier and have time back without that stress, anxiety, and frustration that comes down with performance.
Wow, I love that so much, Matt. And obviously you and I resonate on all those levels, right? Because I
Yeah.
always say to my clients that it does start from here, like from the inside. We can't start externally. We can't get love from other people. We can't get validation or satisfaction or pride from other people. We can. It's important to get that from other people, but it has to start from the inside, because if we just get it from external sources all the time, it doesn't mean anything. And so it really is about looking inwards and being courageous and having that honest conversation and letting go. Like what I'm hearing you say is I'm letting go of what people think about me. Like, so what if meditation seems crazy to some people? It works for me, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't actually matter as long as you find out what works for you to make you feel better. And I think that's a big problem in today's world, is that we're looking so much for other people to tell us what to do, how to feel, what to think, what action to take. And at the end of the day, it's like, what do you actually want to do? And I don't know about you, but when I talk to a lot of people and I ask them, what do you want? And they tell me, I don't know. I think, okay, this is what we need to get down to then, because if you don't know, then what are you doing? Like how can you make the best decision for yourself? How can you figure out the next step for you? You can't. And so it really does have to start with, what do I want?
Well, you can't. I've said it before, and it's this was somebody I knew at Investors years ago, that a great way they described, we want to take every client that we work with from A to B. We need to have a clear definition of what A is, and we absolutely have to have a clear definition of what B is. You cannot build a puzzle without a picture on the box. You'll find the edges, but try and do it. Build a puzzle without a picture on the box, without knowing what you're building. Really hard. It's like building a plane in flight. So if we have a clear definition of that, but to your point, the external validation that we are so used to seeking in pride, in ownership, in hearing how great we are about things, that's good. It's nice to hear those things, and it's nice to get that. But we need to get it inside, because if you have that self-love, if you know that you're showing up really great, and sometimes showing up really great is the greatest that you can in that moment or on that day. It's not always clean. Sometimes it's really messy, but that's the best you can do. That's good. But as long as you recognize that and acknowledge that internally, and you accept and acknowledge that and nurture that internally, then you're pretty untouchable. So you don't need it. You don't need the external accolades. You don't need people to show up and tell you that you did really great. You already have that for yourself. And because you do, if you truly believe it and you embody that, all of that shows up anyway. All those opportunities open. people will show up and be like, what are you doing differently?
Mm.
And I know that. And that's part of what I'm putting into my practice as a sales coach, is that I would get these questions all the time. I didn't realize this until the last month, Vera, that people would say, what are you doing differently? Matt, how are you only really working like 40 hours a week? And the rest of us are hustling 60 hours a week. And I'm sending emails at 9 o'clock at night. You have do not disturb on at 5. What's the difference? And it's like, simple. I'm not worrying about what you're doing, for starters.
Mm.
I'm worried about what I'm doing. And when I worry about what I'm doing, I'm focused on what I can contribute to the people in front of me. So when I'm talking to customers or to clients, I'm getting an understanding of where they're at. And I'm trying to find ways to expand and help them solve more problems. And that's what I was always doing in enterprise software. And now I realize, I'm like, it's at the end of the day, it's just a widget. And that's not to minimize what you and I do as a product, but it's that nothing is going to sell itself unless people connect with the thing, or unless people connect with you. And for people to do both of those things, they need to have a connection with themselves to know what they want. And this ties back to when you ask a client, what do you want? And they say, I don't know. It's like, well, great. We need to know that so that we can put some metrics around how we're going to make you successful, how we're going to work together in this container. But step one can be figuring out what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And you know what? You and I can have this conversation for hours, and maybe we will do it again.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm curious what you are looking to create for yourself this year.
You know, when I reposted this morning your announcement of this episode and this stream, and I was like, yeah, like I'm going to be talking about why I left what I left to create what I created, and creating my best chapter. It's really interesting because the verbiage is pretty close to what I went through in the last year, but I realized that I was closing, not turning the page on my last chapter, but on my last book. And so for me, I'm starting a new book, and I've been writing that book for the last year-ish, or at least the forward to it. For me, it's a completely new world, because my eyes are a lot clearer and a lot more open. I'm able to see through the veneer of BS that we put on ourselves, and that I see that so well in other people, especially the ones that I can help the most. So for me, the next chapter, or this the first chapter of this new book of my life, is going to be around how can I leverage my life's experience, not just in sales, but just my life's experience and everything I've been through, whether it's from the loss of my dad when I was young, or being sent to reform school and having a physically and emotionally and psychologically traumatic experience, to building my career and becoming a late stage father to a 10-year-old daughter, and learning how to grow up with her and how to communicate that. All of these experiences that I have outside of my vocation and my career are woven together to make the fabric of me. How can I contribute with that fabric of what I have so far to other people weaving their own? And in that interaction, how can I continue to weave mine? So this next year, I'm going to be focused on building this business of successful, well, not just myself being successful, but making existing salespeople more successful, making new salespeople successful in their own right, and getting off to a fast start. And then on the one-on-one coaching side, same thing, helping people who have gone through a ringer, experienced success, transmute that success and all the stress and all the anxiety around it to their own betterment, and use that to propel them into the next 20 years. Mm-hmm. So that's very abstract, almost ambiguous. Ultimately, in 2025, I would love to I want to help as many people as I can. I want to talk to as many people as I can. And I want to really start to dramatically change the way that we're doing business by connecting on a heart level, throwing away this Zig Ziglar sales book of the art of manipulation or the art of the deal, because it's a bunch of BS, throwing a bunch more cadence at your clients, your customers, isn't really what works anymore. But talking to people on their level, the more I do that, and the more I help people see the best parts of themselves by meeting them where they're at, talking to them on their level, and helping to elevate them, well, they're going to take that out into the world and do that with more people. So it's kind of a spiritual, holistic embodiment, not quite an MLM or a pyramid scheme, but I want to inspire and motivate other people to go and do that with the people around them. And I always draw it back to, with every session I have, with every client I work with, I want to deliver 4 things, and that's inspiration, motivation, support, and accountability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I write that all the time, and I do it with myself, because what can slip so easily with me is my own accountability. Sometimes it's too easy to be like, you know what, Vera, it's snowing here today. I don't really feel like making those sales calls. I don't really, feel like having to go out and do this networking event. I don't really feel like having, but those are the days that it's like, Matt, be accountable to yourself on this one. And every time I do, I'm grateful that I did.
Well, I have no doubt you're going to be successful and you're going to write a best-selling book, Matt.
Thank you.
Literally, like figuratively and probably literally, and in some future, version of yourself, you're probably going to actually write a book as well. So
I'm doing it right now. I am blogging and writing right now. So it's in the works. Sure.
Amazing. Well, you know what? We're going to stay in touch, obviously, and we'll do another podcast where you can update us on everything. But in the meantime, I do acknowledge you for sharing your story, for really looking inwards, for being honest with yourself, and for sharing your stories and letting people know. Because sometimes it's hard to do. It's hard to be vulnerable and be honest and share. But I think that's what people need to know, that they're not alone, that there's help out there, there's resources, there's support. How can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you, Matt?
Yeah, great question. So my website is Matty Riddel, MATTYRIDDEL.com. So a lot of information's on there. Simple email is just m@mattyriddle.com. Instagram is @MattyRiddle. And then LinkedIn. So those are the 2 social platforms I'm predominantly on, is going to be LinkedIn and on Instagram. That's where you can find me. That's where you can see my content. That's where you can interact. I also have a podcast called the Mild Out Podcast, which I would love to get you on as well. Because it's very much going with this outlaw mentality of going against the grain and breaking some rules. And I try to integrate stories of all sorts of people in there. So there's some car stories and some things about the car culture and some spiritual embodiment and connection there, as well as just good talk tracks on how we can better ourselves with simple ways. I try to deliver in any of that content what I call freemium. So anybody who can't work with me, can't afford to work with me, or isn't quite ready yet, I want to be able to deliver some kind of value. So those social platforms, and then my podcast, I think similar to yours, would be on pretty much all major platforms as well.
Well, I'll put the links in the show notes so people can follow you and connect with you. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Matt. Have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for being on my show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. It's wonderful, and yeah, we're always close, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. Thanks so much for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.